Hey everyone, welcome to Maximus Live episode 77 on this auspicious day in August 11th, 2022. Thank you for everyone who's joining us on Instagram Live. I'm giving you all little waves. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for two folks that we have in the waiting room on Zoom. We'll get to you in just a moment. We're just fired up a Twitter Spaces as well, so hopefully some folks will join there, and we always have our loyal crew on YouTube Live. I'm Dr. Cam Sapa. I'm the CEO of Maximus, clinical psychologist and psychiatry professor. And we use this hour to talk to our existing members about health and hormone optimization. What can you do in terms of optimizing your testosterone levels and also overall health in terms of diet, exercise, sleep, focus, and relationships. We start out every week with a weekly unpopular opinion, and then I take questions from the audience. So you can feel free to type your questions, and for the folks who are on Zoom, I'll bring you on live so we can have a conversation. So if you follow my Twitter, you probably saw some of the unpopular opinions shared. But before I get to that, I wanted to give a special announcement, which is our company actually just successfully closed its Series A financing. You might have seen we shared this on social media. So we've actually raised $15 million to date, including $10 million in our last Series A round of financing. I think we actually announced it yesterday. Super excited. Keith Rabois, Founders Fund, actually led the financing, who's backed us from day one. He's a phenomenal investor, literally number 8 on the Midas list, and has started a lot of great companies as an executive or founder, including PayPal, one of the original PayPal Mafia members. I believe was at Square, Open Door, and has invested in at least a half dozen unicorns as well. So super excited to have him leading around. What it means for Maximus and for our customers is, we're definitely sticking around. We have enough runway for the next couple years, and we'll continue to grow and expand. We're in 15 U.S. states right now. Hopefully we'll get to as close to 50 as possible. I know there's some folks who are eagerly awaiting our services in some states that we are yet to service. Hopefully we'll be in Texas next. So a little sorting out of stuff that we need to do, but we will be there shortly. And bringing you great new products. We have 2 new products that actually should be launched by the end of this year. So we're super excited to announce those, in addition to improvements on our existing products as well. We're always going to iterate and update our protocols to be in line with best available evidence and clinical practice. So really exciting time for the company, and really appreciate your support. In fact, we actually did a RUV in which some of our customers joined us as investors. So we really appreciate that in terms of having skin in the game. So just wanted to share that. Very excited, and really appreciate everyone's support in getting us to where we are today. And hopefully we'll continue to grow and expand and become a great company for men's health. This week's unpopular opinion is actually about masculinity. So, even though we're obviously focused on health and hormone optimization, one of the key reasons we are is because it's not just a decline in testosterone and sperm count that America and the world is suffering from, but it's really a decline in masculinity, which is the phenotypic or external expression of that testosterone. And I think there's a huge lack of masculinity, particularly in modern American society. We've talked at length about this, like the reduction in self-reported guys rating themselves as highly masculine has declined from 82% to, I believe, 49% from guys who are over 65 to guys who are under 30. So guys who are kind of in our father's generation see themselves as highly masculine. Young men no longer do. Partly, I think, because their testosterone levels are lower than their dad's, but also because masculinity has obviously taken on a toxic connotation, which I think is very unfortunate. It's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But, a very telltale sign of why this is a problem is because I think there's literally a market demand for masculinity, and particularly for masculine role models. Robert Bly, who was one of the leaders of the mythopoetic men's movement, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year, talked about it as father thirst, which I thought was a very poetic way of describing it, that there is a thirst or a demand that we have for obviously literal fathers. I think folks who didn't grow up with a dad feel there is something missing. But I also think on a national level as well, we need positive role models in terms of who's running the country, our bosses, the people that are in leadership positions. There is that sort of father thirst or demand for sort of positive masculinity. Unfortunately, I think what's kind of happened that's filled the void is these ultra like macho sort of masculine influencers have come in. And I think the reason that they're popular is in the age of sort of androgyny, as I like to call the modern times. When you get a guy who is truly masculine, it's a stark counterexample to sort of the wishy-washy father figures that you see, particularly if you pay attention to how men are portrayed in sitcoms. It's like I call it the Homer Simpson phenomenon. It's like the fat, dumb dad, essentially, is how men are portrayed. And you see that in even the live sitcoms too, right? Guys are kind of typically displayed as overweight fathers who are kind of goofy in some way, and they're not sort of masculine icons. So when you get sort of a young guy, he's a weightlifter, bodybuilder kind of guy, has a deep voice, and has sort of the machismo personality. I think there's a natural attraction by both men and women to those role models because it's so missing, I think, compared to, let's say, like the 80s action stars, Sylvester Stallone, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Val Kilmer, Bruce Willis, those kinds of guys who were the more traditional, at least external expression of masculinity. Now, the downside of it is I think these guys, in modern days, almost they're like playing a role. They're like actors. It's like essentially a guy who's LARPing, as they say, live action role playing as a man. And it's not that they're disingenuous. I think some of these guys are truly naturally masculine, but they're exactly the type of masculinity that I think is outdated and is justly criticized, which is almost like you get someone who's 100% masculine and 0% feminine, right? And I've talked about this before, that masculinity and femininity are orthogonal constructs. They're separate, actually. They're not one spectrum. You can be 100% on masculinity and 100% on femininity. Or you could be, let's say, 80% on masculinity, 20% on femininity. Your femininity does not come at the cost of your masculinity. And when you think about it that way, I think that opens guys up to be much more robust, complete human beings. Because you're saying, I don't have to sacrifice my masculinity in order to show sensitivity. I'm not any less tough to be able to talk about my feelings because it's not a slider scale trade-off where, if I lose 10 points of masculinity, I get 10 points of femininity. No, they're separate constructs. And I think guys, these sort of masculine influencers don't get that. They put on this very tough guy bravado and they talk about, oh, just suck it up, take action, therapy sucks, mental health is bad for you. And I think it's very, very harmful. Just also, like, given that men's mental health is probably the most under-addressed issue in American society today. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death for men between the ages of 21 and 45. As one of the great MMA stars, Patty, talked about, I think one of his friends unfortunately committed suicide, and he was very heartbroken and gave this very emotional expression in the ring about, man, I'd rather a guy cry on my shoulders than I have to carry his coffin the next week, right? And unfortunately, I think these sort of masculine influencers are doing a great disservice to modern society and the young men that look up to them by saying, oh, suck it up, forget your feelings, do the right thing. And they describe therapy as this kind of stewing or inaction, which is far from the case. There's literally behavioral therapy that's all about taking action. And obviously, look, I think all of us know to take action, right? But the reason that you end up in therapy is because all of us, 100% of us don't do exactly all the things that we know we should be doing. And why is that? Because there's emotional barriers, right? And so working with a psychologist helps us understand and overcome and gives us the tools and resources to overcome the emotional barriers to obviously getting shit done. And so therapy is not about venting. It's not about, let me talk about my feelings, hold hands, kumbaya, and cry, which is the unfortunate stereotype of therapy. And you can tell someone who's never been in therapy if they think about it that way. And so I really think these guys are selling almost like a shallow brand of red pill psychology to guys who are in need of a positive masculine role model. Versus when you see the role models of the mythopoetic men's movement, like Robert Bly, they are masculine men who are sophisticated. They're academics, they're poets, they're writers who can talk about depth psychology. They can talk about feelings. They encourage guys to do emotional expression, go to therapy, etc. And you can do both, right? And so I really think that's missing these days. You get these very like, and I'm not criticizing Jocko Willenick or David Goggins, but I think that's the type of archetype that you see is it's just tough, 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 no feelings, right? Versus guys who can be tough and actually talk about their feelings and show a much more robust and complete side to themselves. The analogy that I make with these sort of male influencers, it's exactly how G.I. Joe is sold to little kids. Little kids love G.I. Joe because he's like the male and antithesis to Barbie, right? Barbie is like almost like a caricature of a woman, and GI Joe is a caricature of a man. He's like this tough, unfeeling soldier, and which is great when you're role playing, right? When you're playing with toys as a kid, but as an adult, is GI Joe your role model as a man? No, right? Because you want someone who's a great leader and a great lover, and has more parts to his life than just probably flying a fighter jet. So anyway, this week's unpopular opinion is just I really think there's a need for more balanced masculine role models that are not just the tough scream in your face growl. And that's great. Like, it's great to listen to that for 15 minutes before a workout to get hyped up, but I'm not going to listen to that guy for relationship advice. And I think you really need guys to have realistic conceptions of relationships because women are really important. It's really critical to our dialogue that they need to be part of the conversation. We need to know how to relate to them in a mature way. So anyway, hopefully, our company exhibits that both with this show, but with also the people that we bring onto the podcast. If you actually go back on our YouTube channel, with every guy that we've interviewed, we had a series called Making the Man, right? Before we get into the whole actionable advice of how did I become a billionaire and how can you learn from that guy too, it's like, well, where's the come up story? How did you become the man that you did? And I think, showing those role models, I particularly think if you watch the episodes with JT and Josh Hatch are really good examples of guys who are, like strong guys, but also really in touch with their emotions, have successful relationships with their wives and families. And I point to them as sort of good role models of men. And we certainly need more guys like that. So do check out those episodes, and hopefully we can contribute to the national dialogue about healthy and mature masculinity, because God knows that we need it. All right, with that being said, let's get to questions. I'm going to bring our first guy from the waiting room. In the meantime, if you have questions, all the folks who are listening on Instagram, you can feel free to type it in there, and we'll answer them in a second. Still think it's connecting to the audio. Hello, hello.
Let me turn off my. Hey, nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. How are you doing?
Good, good, good. And congratulations on the Series A.
Thank you, thank
yeah,
you.
I think what you just said is I'm 100% with it. And I actually think that, a lot of women, at least a lot of women around me, crave those men.
Mm-hmm.
Men who are equal, who can cry, but who have the quality that they're looking for in a mate, right? So anyway, I have a question. I know this is something that's been discussed on the community, but it's relatively new for me. I just realized a couple of days ago that I am starting to bald.
Yeah.
Which is very frustrating. I know I should be grateful. I'm, relatively old, and I still have a lot of hair here.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're doing still pretty well.
Yeah, but it's I was at the hairdresser today, and she showed me, and it's happening in the top back of my hair. So what can I do? I have never faced that problem before, and I don't know what to do. If there's anything I can do.
Yes. So it's a great question. So what you're talking about is what we call androgenic alopecia or male pattern baldness, right? Is the sort of the common term for it. And unfortunately, it's almost like I would call it a disease of aging, if you call it even a disease, or condition of aging, maybe is a better term. It almost inevitably happens if you have the genetic predisposition to it, which certainly if you have, I think, European, Middle Eastern, etc., ancestry, very, very susceptible. And Indians, East Asians, less so. Fortunately, they're lucky in that genetic department. So now the term androgenic alopecia assumes that basically it's androgenically driven, right? So the old theory has always been that testosterone converts into DHT, and DHT is the culprit that exacerbates it. Now, I think with the modern research that's been coming out, that's been put into question essentially, in that there obviously are DHT blockers, right? This is Propecia or finasteride, and there's another stronger version called dutasteride. So that's the only, in fact, FDA-approved medication for the treatment of androgenic alopecia or male pattern baldness. Now, does it work? It's okay, I would say. I think in some folks, some people have had good responses to it. Other folks, not so much, and some people even negative responses to it. So I think the desire is that, oh man, we can just single it down to one molecule, which is DHT, and it's a simple and easy explanation for why all of our hair falls out as we get old. And unfortunately, now the drug works really well in that regard. If you actually do a blood test, you can see your DHT drop precipitously, right? I actually did this myself when I tried finasteride or Propecia. My DHT levels were in the 50s. It went down to like 10, which is actually like below the normal range. It clearly works at suppressing your DHT. The problem is, does it actually help in terms of hair loss? I didn't really notice any difference. And unfortunately, in a small subset of people, they experience sexual dysfunction. The problem is DHT, as we talked about in previous shows, is responsible for your virility. A lot of your aggression, drive, sexuality comes from DHT. It's almost more potent. I think it's about 4 times more potent than testosterone, in fact, at binding to the androgen receptors. So it's almost like you're, in some ways, almost like chemically castrating yourself in order to try to save your hair. And for a lot of guys, maybe cosmetically, that's worth the trade-off. I just don't think it works well enough to justify it. If it was like, yes, it's absolutely will save your hair, but take the risk, I think it's worth a gamble. I don't think the results are particularly great at growing back hair. I think if you're bald, unfortunately, it's gone. The best it can do is really stop or slow hair loss. And you have to decide if that risk reward ratio is worth it for you. There obviously are a bunch of other telemedicine companies like Keeps, Hims, Ro that all prescribe it because, like I said, it's really the only prescription option. We've actually made a choice not to, and I'll tell you the reason why. We have advisors who are obviously deep in this space, and they just don't think philosophically that shutting down your DHT is obviously wise, just from like a health and performance standpoint. It is a key hormone, and you're basically pushing it down to, like I said, almost like chemical castration levels. And like I said, doesn't really work that great. Like I would say mild to moderate efficacy. And in a small subset, you get these terrible sexual dysfunction that some people believe is permanent. So it's called post-finasteride syndrome. There's a debate about how real it is, but in the literature, at least, a few percentage of people get it, and it is sort of risky. So I think that's obviously up to you if you make that decision to, if it's worth it to essentially to take the risk with finasteride or Propecia. I will say as a company, we're not going to do it. Literally, our lawyers were like, you got to put a black box warning if you prescribe this. There's liability, extra liability insurance, because there's been lawsuits around it. And so we just think it's a risky medication, essentially, and we don't think it's particularly worth it. So, okay, what are the alternatives? What are called the big 3. So one of them we talked about, finasteride. The other one is Minoxidil, or the brand name is Rogain. That's obviously been around for a long time. That is not prescription. You can get it over the counter in strengths up to 5%. There is actually good research on Minoxidil. I would say it's mildly efficacious, but there is a lot. It's been well studied, and it does seem to help hair and beard growth. it doesn't seem to have as much of the side effect risk because it's not suppressing DHT. It really works as a vasodilator. It increases blood flow to the scalp, basically. And that's kind of its mechanism of action. I think it's relatively safe. It's relatively easy to get. Now, there's two main forms of it. You can get it cheaply in a dropper form. It's liquid. You got to kind of like drop it on your head and kind of smear it about. Some guys don't like it because it's watery and greasy and it kind of messes up the styling of their hair. My preference is to get a foam-based version of it. It's more expensive, but the reason I like it is it lacks an ingredient called propylene glycol. So propylene glycol is a thickener or a lubricant, essentially. And some people find it to be a little irritating. It's another extra ingredient, and it creates that greasy feel. The sort of aerosol pump version of it lacks that because it comes out as a foam, and it's almost like a mousse. You kind of just spread it around your hair, and I think it honestly styles better, and minimizing extra ingredients, I think, is a safe thing. The easiest place to get it is Costco. They have a Kirkland signature version of it, 5% aerosol foam. I think it's like 3-pack. I forgot how much it costs, but it's like Costco is always the best deal. It's probably the cheapest place you can get it. And like I said, it's not going to be miraculous, but I certainly use it, and I think it's the best sort of like risk-reward ratio thing on the market. Third part of the big three is something called Ketoconazol. Ketoconazol, the brand name is Nizoral, is a antifungal shampoo. The mechanism of action is it may also inhibit DHT, but it doesn't absorb systemically like Propecia does. So when you're only obviously putting it on your head while you're in the shower, the best thing to do is just lather your scalp right when you get in the shower, leave it on as you're taking a shower for 5 to 10 minutes, however long you shower, go wash your body, do whatever you do, shave, etc. Wash it off at the end. Doing that, basically whenever you take a shower is recommended. They sell it over the counter in 1% strength. If you want to get the 2% strength, you have to get that through a doctor. So your primary care physician is usually comfortable enough with a shampoo that if you just ask them, hey, I want to, try it for reduction of balding. Can I get Nizoral or Ketoconazol on a 2% strength? They'll usually be able to do that. And using like online coupons, it's pretty cheap. It's like through GoodRx, probably cost you $5 to $10 for a bottle. It's really concentrated. You don't need to use that much. It'll foam. Does it help that much? Also, like Minoxidil, I would say it's mild. So those are what are considered the big three. They're like the staples that most people use. They're the most evidence-based, essentially, ingredients for hair loss. There's a bunch of more exotic stuff that's out there, but they're not really well characterized. So that's what I would say. I would say I like and use 2 out of those 3 personally. That's what I recommend when people like you ask me for those. I think it's a good place to start, especially when you don't have a lot yet. Your hairdresser's just noticing it. So if you're kind of early in the Norwood stages are basically like a description of how bad essentially advances over time. Your hairline's still pretty good. You obviously have like a little bit of recession right here, maybe a little bit in the back, but I would definitely start with the Nizoral shampoo, the Ketoconazol shampoo, some Minoxidil. I think that's a good place just to start, and then monitor and see how that goes. The last thing I would combine with that is there is some studies that show that derma-stamping or derma rolling, or also known as microneedling, enhances the efficacy of Minoxidil. Interestingly, maybe quadruples the efficacy of it. And so it's basically it's not a fun practice. You basically use needles and you poke your head, and it essentially does 2 things. It enhances the absorption of the Minoxidil, but also essentially wounding your skin, releases growth factors that help the growth and regeneration of new skin and hair. My personal preference is I don't like the derma rollers. The derma rollers are basically these rollers that have needles on them, and you roll it along your scalp. The problem with obviously a roller is you imagine like a row of needles. They're pushing the scalp up, so you wound the skin and then you kind of flick it. Derma stamps just go straight up and down, and so you're puncturing and needling it along the way rather than rolling it, which kind of creates worse wounds, if you will. So I am a fan of sort of the derma stamping or micro needling as essentially an enhancer of the hair loss medications. So I will say, as a company, we are obviously, the reason I know so much about this is we are releasing a product. It's going to be released at the end of September. That's going to be our formulation of this. It will include a prescription strength version of minoxidil. So minoxidil, as I said, over the counter is only 5%. If you want a stronger 6, 7, 8%, that has to be prescription. Just like the Nizoral 2% is prescription, 1% is over the counter. And we'll have other ingredients there as well, which I'll talk about at a later date. We're actually we're looking into including the Derma-stamp actually as part of the monthly subscription. You basically get a fresh one every single month, because needles, obviously, as you reuse them, just become weaker and less sharp essentially over time. So you want to throw them out and use new ones. So that's basically my long-winded answer to your question. In 2 months, basically, we'll have our hair and beard growth product that'll include everything and more that I just discussed. In the meantime, if you want to obviously get ahead of it, I think starting out with minoxidil and Nizoral is a safe, mild approach.
That's amazing. And can I ask you, do you use both of those products every day yourself?
Yeah, minoxidil, basically, every time after you shower, because you want your scalp to be clean, right? If you use hair product or just the sweat and sebum, it's less efficacious when you put a spray on. So basically, every time after I shower, use the Nizoral or the Ketoconazol shampoo. Cleans the scalp really nicely. It obviously dries your scalp, but then you want it to be nice and dry. Apply the minoxidil. And yeah, basically do that every time after you shower. Now, I use hair product, so it kind of restores the moisture, because obviously the shampoo strips your scalp and hair of natural oils. I almost basically put it back. Now, the microneedling only needs to be done once a week. It's painful, it's annoying, but thankfully, because it's you're basically wounding your scalp and your skin, you don't want to do that every day. It's too much. It's almost like exfoliation of your skin, which also, by the way, is a great skincare practice. Women are very good about it, men are not. You want to do it about once a week, because you're basically removing skin, and it takes time literally for your skin to heal. So you got to think about the scalp as the same way, once a week at most, for the microneedling. Minoxidil, though, the research basically shows once to twice a day is actually the recommendation. But I find once a day, one, it's more practical than doing it morning and night. And second, you only generally take a shower once a day. Maybe some people take more, but I like to apply it when it's freshly shampooed and your hair is clean, essentially.
Got it. And sorry, do you have a brand recommendation for the microneedling? Is there...
No, unfortunately, we're literally finding a supplier in overseas to bring it, because the stuff on Amazon we haven't found to be great. So yeah, not yet. We're literally trying to find the best one that we can. The only thing I would say is I prefer the stamps versus the rollers. The rollers, like I said, it creates too much tearing.
Got it. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it's a tough issue. The reality is the best technology that we have right now can really just focus on stopping or slowing the hair loss. But I mean, you're in a good point. Nobody, your hair looks great and nobody would notice. So it's good to get ahead of it. Prevention is basically way better than trying to treat something that's already gone. Hopefully in our lifetimes, they'll come up with a new wonder drug and we'll carry it that can literally regrow hair. But I think actually the stuff that we're gonna release is actually way better than what's on the market right now. And there's an interesting scientific story to it that I'll talk about in a few weeks. But yeah, that's where I would go for now, and I think it's a great question, and I wish you the best.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Bye.
All right, I think some questions from, unfortunately, I think we lost our other guy in the waiting room, but I'll answer some questions from Instagram. Have you guys ever thought about opening a location, like a physical location? Yeah, it's people have asked about that, and the answer is no. And I'll tell you why. I'm obviously used to working in brick and mortar healthcare. I used to work in hospitals, ICUs, ERs, outpatient clinics. And it's great. It's just you can't scale it, right? It's a pain to come in and drive. It's a pain to get an appointment. And it's just not necessary in the online world. Like telemedicine doing this is, we certainly know from the psychotherapy literature just as effective as coming in person. And nowadays with at-home lab testing, the amazing technology that we have with our blood test kits, you can accurately measure your testosterone at home just as good as Quest or LabCorp, which we validated. And with mail order pharmacy, we can ship you your medications right to your door. So it just makes it so much easier and more convenient. So I don't think there's ever a need for it. And so yeah, these are actually, thank you. This is our new kits. So yeah, no plans to do that, and hopefully we'll avoid doing that honestly in the future, because I just think it's much more convenient to do everything in the comfort and convenience of your own home. Someone asked a question: how can I prevent bloating with enclomiphene? It's not a common side effect of enclomiphene to have bloating, but all the SERMs in general, the selective estrogen receptor modulators, have that possibility. So I think the main thing with that is just make sure you're on the right dose. And obviously, if there's other things that you're taking that may exacerbate it. So creatine, for instance, aids water retention. And although it is an ergogenic aid that has good science behind it, sometimes like taking on too much stuff that contributes to bloating may exacerbate it more than a point that you're willing to tolerate. So if you're predisposed to bloating, you may want to not take creatine or other things. And I would just say, like, watch your sodium intake. Sodium also increases water retention. You want to basically maximize your potassium to sodium ratio. Potassium as much as possible, sodium as little as possible. You don't need to go zero sodium, but I would say, hunter gatherers consume less than a gram a day and they're totally fine. So, the more you can balance that out, the less bloating you'll get, and also the better for your blood pressure. I always talk about potassium sodium ratio being one of the critical measures for your blood pressure. So I would say just focus on dietary changes as well, in that you cut your sodium, maximize your potassium. Great foods for potassium are tomatoes, avocados, baobab, which the powder version you can buy on Amazon. My favorite brand is Terrasol. All of those are high potassium foods. And obviously there's a decent amount of potassium that comes in meat and animal products as well. So get that up as much as possible to reduce some of the bloat. All right. Comment: I've been taking enclomiphene for 3 months now. I started out at 6.25 milligrams, and I've increased to 12.5. I have noticed a slight increase in my penile growth. Very interesting feedback. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's not a crazy concept. Actually, ironically, we were talking about testosterone and DHT. DHT being the sort of the androgenic derivative of testosterone, and there is some interesting literature. It's actually scientific publications with this class of medications. When you increase testosterone and increase DHT, it can actually increase penile growth. So it's not actually a crazy concept. We don't obviously market it for that purpose because we can't guarantee those results. But we certainly know also from the research literature that increased testicular volume, meaning bigger balls. There is a published poster study that was, I believe, presented at a urological conference that showed that the 25 milligram dosage of enclomiphene actually literally, I think through ultrasound, had bigger balls. Now, I don't think the point of that is obviously aesthetic, although great, enjoy it if that's what you're into. But the reason it does that is because it's stimulating the testes with the LH and the FSH to produce more testosterone and sperm count. So I would say, look, it's a nice bonus if you do get bigger balls and larger penis, but I wouldn't promise that that's going to happen, nor is it going to be a huge difference that you're going to like maybe visibly notice. But I guess some guys do. So awesome. Enjoy. That's what I would say to that.
Put a question via YouTube. First one is, when do you guys plan on expanding to Illinois?
Yeah, great question. It's at the near the top of our list. Our prioritization is to obviously expand to states that have large populations. So I would say New York and Illinois are, obviously huge states, and I think they're the two biggest gaps, honestly, that we have. So I would say very soon. I don't have a launch date yet, but I'm really hoping in the next, definitely within the next quarter. So hopefully very soon. It's also, I might have mentioned this, near and dear to my heart because I used to live in Chicago. I actually did my fellowship at a Chicago VA there in behavioral medicine, and so yeah, shout out Chi-Town or wherever you are in Illinois. and hopefully soon. So just keep on email us. We'll obviously let you know, but it's definitely going to be sooner than other states for sure.
Hey, Dr. Cam, wondering if you have any study tips that you've learned while in med school. Best study tips for self-learning for those not in college as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do you study productively? I did my undergrad at Harvard, and honestly, the best class that they had wasn't even an actual course. It was literally like a workshop on how to speed read. And there was a lecture in one of my psychology courses that was about this book called The Power of Full Engagement, which I highly recommend, by the way. I think it's written by Jim Lair and Tony Schwartz, I believe is his name, who ironically wrote Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal. He was actually the ghostwriter for that book, which he felt very guilty about, actually. But powerful engagement, the basic philosophy of it is that you need to study or work like a professional athlete trains. And they had a lot of experience, in fact, working with professional tennis athletes. And if you understand how athletes train, they're not training for 12 hours a day. You just can't physically do that. They're training in usually very intense bouts, and then they rest and recover, right? And if you think about bodybuilding, is probably the best example of that, right? Even some of the greats, like I talk about Dorian Yates, only trained 4 times a week, 45 minutes, and then spent a lot of time napping, sleeping at least 8 hours a night, and resting so that the muscles grow literally when you're sleeping. They don't grow in the gym. You tear them down in the gym, and they grow while you're sleeping. So that principle can be applied to your studying and working as well. So a lot of people might have heard of the Pomodoro technique, which is based on this principle of like work for 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. I actually think it's too short for most people. There's been large-scale, essentially naturalistic studies done by an app called Rescue Time, which is a little plugin you can install on your computer to track productivity. And they basically found that most people work on average for about 52 minutes, I believe, before their productivity drops off. So the way that I like to do it is to work. It depends, because I have sort of a manager schedule, right, where I'm in a lot of meetings. I try to schedule the meetings to be 25 minutes with a 5-minute break, or a 50-minute meeting with a 10-minute break. But I think if you're studying, you can also basically apply that principle as well, in that I would try to study in 25 to 50-minute increments, depending on sort of your attention span and the complexity of the material. If you can focus for 50, do the 50. If you're a little bit more inattentive / it's really hard to grapple with the material, or you're prone to procrastination, it's maybe easier to start a little smaller with the 25. And then what you want to do is shut off all distraction. Put your phone away, not even in a line of sight, because that actually probably increases the temptation. If you have to be on the computer, shut down all your apps. Put software that blocks them so you're not even tempted to do it. And if you can avoid it, if you're just reading a textbook or whatever, just focus in on that. So you want to be fully locked in, hyper focused. A little bit of music may be okay if you need a little bit of stimulation. Some people don't like listening to music, it makes it worse. I would say those are people who are more introverted. They're already highly stimulated. Extroverted people like having music. That's sort of an interesting personality difference. Don't use music that has words. If you're reading, it disrupts the reading comprehension. You can listen to non-verbal music, house techno, whatever you like. If you're reading, if you're doing stuff that's like more quant spreadsheets, you can obviously listen to words. So create that hyper-focused environment, focus 100% for those 25 to 50 minutes, and then for those 5 to 10 minutes when you're taking a break, get up and do the opposite. So you want to get up, get away from your desk, you want to go for a walk, you want to look at things that are far away because you've been staring at things that are very myopic, and have, instead of a hyper-focus like you've been focusing on your studying, you want to have an open awareness, which is taking your surroundings around you. Don't sit there and think about your work or your school. Just notice your surroundings. Notice the details. What are the colors of the leaves? What are the smell of the flowers? How does the wind feel on my skin as I walk? How does the ground feel underneath the soles of my feet as I'm taking steps? be very grounded and sensory oriented when you're taking those breaks. And you want to alternate back and forth. It's like our interval workout: study, rest, study, rest, study, recover. And after you've done a couple of those, you can do, I would say, up to 4 within a morning, an afternoon, or an evening. You want to take larger breaks in between. So obviously take a lunch break. If you're transitioning from morning to afternoon, take a little afternoon nap or exercise break for at least an hour, and then get back into it. Realistically, I would say for most people, 4 hours of actual focused studying is just about the max that you can do. Now, if there's other types of work that you need to do, writing essays, etc., other work or activities, then sure, that may be 8 hours or more. But I honestly think if you can get 4 concentrated hours of studying in a day, you can be honestly very productive. You can get great grades. I actually think you can get above a 3.5 with 4 hours of studying a day. So think about it that way. Try to be focused on efficiency and really getting a good solid 4 hours in, rather than fucking around for 8 to 12 hours, which is what most students do, half-assing their work, answering text messages, being on Instagram. And yeah, you're there for 8, 12 hours. You're not even enjoying it. It's better that you go do 4 hours of real studying and then go work out, hang out, do real fun stuff, than do half-ass versions of each. So whole ass it, don't full half-ass it, as I like to say, and use sort of the Pomodoro or the technique. And just to put the full circle in the power of full engagement, they talk about essentially shifting from a positive high arousal state to a positive low arousal state. So that's like I'm going to rest, take a slow walk, take a nap, from doing the intense exercise or the intense studying. So that's what you want to be alternating between, because if you don't, you go from a positive high arousal state to a negative high arousal state, which is like anger, frustration, etc. So whenever you feel yourself burning out in terms of you're losing your energy or you're losing your positivity to negativity, that's a sign or signal that you need to rest and recover to maintain your positivity and maintain your energy. You can't maintain your energy for 12 hours. That's why we need to sleep, rest, nap, etc. So doing that proactively before you start getting burned out, and this is where listening to your body is really important, just like athletes do, is going to be really helpful to kind of figure out the right amount of rest. I've given you sort of guidelines for rest recovery intervals, but in the end, you got to listen to your body and your individual ability to focus and your individual basically capacity to do work. It's going to be a little different, so you have to adjust accordingly. So I know that's a lot of information, but that's kind of like my general framework for productive focus, whether it's for school or for work. All right, someone had a question of why is it if you stop the medication, your levels go back down? Because that's how medications work. Medications are basically based on the idea that they float around in your system and they have an action on your receptors. So enclomiphene is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. Basically blocks the estrogen from estradiol from binding to the estrogen receptor, and by doing so it stimulates the hypothalamus to release LH and FSH to the pituitary, which stimulates the testes to produce testosterone and sperm. So it needs to be existent in your bloodstream. It's like saying, well, why does the door not open if I don't put the key in it? The key has to be in the door to unlock it. And so the drugs are basically acting as a key to unlock the door. And if you lose your key, it's not going to open the door anymore. So there's no drugs that have permanent actions other than things that are like basically curing a virus or curing like a bacteria or disease. An antibiotic works because it gets rid of the bacteria. But in this case, in terms of stimulating testosterone, it needs to be taken. And it's the same thing with vitamin D. As long as you take vitamin D, your levels go up. You stop taking it, it goes back down to where it was before. So that's just basically how most medications work, and that's the name of the game. Person on IG who's typed, I have a question. You can just type the question. You don't need to ask permission. Go ahead. Are there any other questions from YouTube? Or Twitter Spaces. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, if folks don't have any more questions, we can call it a day.
We did have this topic arise on Discord. Can you remind us why PDE5 inhibitors might not be the best thing to take, especially when considering sexual function?
I'm not sure I ever said PDE5 inhibitors are. Wait, let me see that again. Why there's some research that PDE5 improves cognitive function in terms of memory, attention processing. Right. Oh, okay. Sorry. This was a different sort of question. Someone was asking about concentration, right? So one of the interesting, less commonly talked about effects of PDE5 inhibitors is that they enhance cerebral blood flow. It doesn't just enhance blood flow to the penis, which is what they're marketed for, but it enhances blood flow everywhere. So it includes blood flow to your brain. And obviously when you enhance blood flow to the brain, your ability to, your cognitive function usually improves. So there's been a bunch of studies that show an improvement in memory, attention, processing speed. Basically a lot of the cognitive variables that you can measure across the board show improvement. Now, that's a different mechanism of action than how stimulants work, right? So stimulants, like a caffeine, essentially, or adenosine receptor antagonists that's, increase your awakeness, essentially. And the prescription stimulants, like the amphetamines or the adderall that people are familiar with, are release dopamine and norepinephrine, or AKA noradrenaline. So they clearly make you very alert. They increase your heart rate. It literally keeps you awake, and you feel it because it's energy, right? But it's kind of a artificial stimulated energy. That's why obviously people don't like, for the most part, the feeling on them, because it makes you anxious, jittery, sweaty, especially on higher dosages, or if you don't have a tolerance to them. I actually avoid all stimulants altogether. I'm too sensitive to them. But I think a lot of people, on the other hand, like that feeling, because if they're tired or chronically sleep deprived, then clearly being more awake or alert or energized is fixing a deficit, right? But those medications, like, you feel it, and even if you don't have ADHD, you do focus better when your dopamine and norepinephrine is firing. The problem is you get a crash, and is it a long-term great idea to constantly overstimulate your neurotransmitters? Questionable, right? Unless the cost benefit is worth it for you and you truly have ADHD. For recreational purposes, I don't think people should be abusing stimulants. And certainly even the over-the-counter mild ones like caffeine, you have to be mindful of, because you can be addicted to it, and people really do get withdrawal symptoms in the forms of headaches and decreased mood if they're too addicted to them. Now, PDE5 inhibitors, because they don't work through that mechanism of action, it doesn't work on the neurotransmitters. It's not working on your brain chemicals. It's just increasing blood flow. So it's not going to make you more awake. It's not going to make you more like alert. It's not going to give you energy like a caffeine or an Adderall does. And so you're going to be disappointed, quite frankly, if you're looking for that stimulant feeling, right? This is just going to be like the feeling that you had when you've had a great night's sleep and you're relaxed and your blood is flowing, you're feeling good. That's probably what the PDE5 really inhibitor feels like. It's not psychoactive. That's what I'm trying to say, right? Where you're not going to notice it as clearly, but it's just like, all right, the blood's flowing to the brain. Your brain has the nutrients that it needs in order to, do what it does. And so it's less stark. It's less obvious, I would say. So it's going to be kind of like a milder effect. So we don't necessarily market it. I think it's like one of the sub points, I guess, of the reason you could take the Lover protocol. But I was just almost like telling that person on the Discord that, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, right? If you're comparing it to Adderall, you're probably going to be disappointed. On the other hand, it's much safer than taking Adderall long term for most people who don't have ADHD, I should say, and it's not sort of medically justified. So yes, you can take PDE5 inhibitors, long story short, for enhancing memory, attention, processing speed, but it's going to be subtle. it's not going to be psychoactive. So as long as you're okay with that and you understand that, and it's not going to make a night or day and day difference, then great, try it for that. But don't expect miracles either. It's an enhancer. It's not it doesn't force sort of attention in the same way that stimulants do. Someone asked a question, is there a big difference between 7 or 8 hours of sleep for increased testosterone production? And the answer to that is 10 to 15%. There's a linear trend between 4 to 8 hours of sleep in terms of 10 to 15% increase in testosterone per extra hour of sleep up to 8 hours. So can you get extra testosterone from 7 to 8? Yes, theoretically speaking. Now, that's based on an average aggregate from research literature. Your results may vary. Some people may be totally fine on 7 and may not get a boost on 8. There's always individual variability. But given that that phenomenon happens on average for most people, if you can get it, I would say it's worth the extra hour of sleep. And also just listen to your body and how you feel. I definitely notice a difference between when I get even 7.5 to 7. If I get that extra half an hour average of sleep that week, my attention and my mood is better. And certainly on a night where I get 8+ hours, the next day I'm feeling great. So I think even just beyond testosterone, the effects on energy and mood are remarkable with sleep, and it's totally worth it if you can prioritize it. So I would certainly recommend it as well. As long as you can. I know at some point sometimes when you get a little older, it's hard to sleep past 7 hours. You really just got to go to bed earlier. And otherwise you're just going to wake up at the same time. But if you can do it, I recommend it. I think that's all the questions for this week. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Maximus Live episode 77. Really great questions. I really appreciate everyone joining us on Instagram. Thanks to our one follower on Twitter Spaces and a bunch of the folks who were on Instagram Live. Thank you for the person who called in. I'm sorry we missed the other person. It sounds like they were on their iPhone and couldn't call in, but if you want to call in later next week, we have this show every Thursday at 6 o'clock. See someone on Instagram saying, "You're amazing, bro." Thank you very much. You are amazing. All of our customers and followers really appreciate all of your support. It's really beyond, by the way, the products and the business. I just love the community. Remember, we launched the community when we weren't making a single dollar selling a single product, and we're just dedicated to improving men in terms of mutual improvement in mind and body, and we still are dedicated to that mission, and all of you make that possible. So I will see you all on the Discord. Feel free to join us at discord.maximustribe.com, where we can continue to talk about health and performance optimization. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I'll catch you all next week.